My beloved, blood has always carried mystery, authority, and power. From the beginning of time, every culture, every kingdom, and every spiritual realm has recognized that blood is not just liquid in the body, it is life itself. The Bible declares that the life of every creature is in the blood, which means that blood carries more than oxygen and nutrients. It carries identity, covenant, and authority. That is why witches fear it. That is why the kingdom of darkness trembles at the very mention of it. Because blood is the seal of ownership. And wherever blood is applied, ownership is declared. Witches thrive on fear, manipulation, and secrecy. They use rituals to gain access to people's lives, but what they dread most is the revelation of blood. Blood exposes them. Blood interrupts their incantations. Blood breaks their contracts. Why? Because in the spiritual realm, blood is the loudest voice. It speaks louder than curses, louder than hexes, louder than the words of men. When witches see blood, they don't just see red liquid. They see boundaries, they see protection, and they see a covenant they cannot trespass. From ancient times, altars were built around blood. Sacrifices involved blood because it was the key to unlocking spiritual dimensions. Even witches understand this. That is why they attempt to mimic it with animal sacrifices. But here's the secret they don't want you to know. Every counterfeit is proof that the real thing exists. They imitate because they know the true power rests in blood. But they can never match the power of blood consecrated to God. That's why they retreat. That's why they scatter when confronted with it. Blood establishes legal rights in the spirit. Contracts in the physical world are signed with ink, but in the spiritual world, contracts are sealed with blood. Witches know this principle well, but they also know they cannot override a higher covenant. And the highest covenant of all is blood that has already been shed once and for all. That blood has authority to cancel every demonic agreement, erase every generational curse, and silence every witchcraft accusation. They fear it because it declares finality. It speaks of a finished work that no dark power can undo. The greatest fear of witches is that you will come into this understanding. They thrive when you are ignorant, when you treat blood as common, when you see it as just biology. But the moment you realize blood is a weapon, blood is a covering, blood is a covenant, they lose their grip. They cannot manipulate a man or woman who walks under the consciousness of blood. They cannot invade a household marked by blood. They cannot torment a destiny sealed in blood. What they don't want you to know is that the blood is the one thing they cannot counterfeit, cannot cancel, and cannot conquer. It is eternal, unbreakable, and incorruptible. And when you declare it over your life, your family, your future, every witch, every sorcerer, every hidden enemy has no choice but to bow. Because blood speaks louder than their whispers in the dark. Blood has always been the marker of covenant. When you study history, you discover that every tribe, every ancient people, even those who had no knowledge of God, understood that blood was sacred. They would cut their hands and join them together to make a blood covenant, promising loyalty unto death. They knew that once blood is shed, it speaks of life, and life cannot be reversed. Witches understand this law. That's why they fear it. Because blood means there is no turning back. It is a binding transaction, a spiritual receipt. Now, the question is not whether blood has power. The question is which blood you are living under. Because witches operate by counterfeit blood covenants, they use blood sacrifices to strengthen their spells. They spill the blood of animals to imitate spiritual authority. But what they know, and what they don't want you to know, is that there exists a superior blood that renders all other blood powerless. When that blood is applied, it not only cancels their sacrifices, but it exposes their weakness. When God delivered Israel from Egypt, He didn't tell them to use weapons. He didn't tell them to sharpen swords. He didn't tell them to prepare for battle against Pharaoh's magicians. No. He told them to take the blood of a lamb and put it on their doorposts. And when the destroyer passed through the land, the instruction was clear. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. That was not just about Israel. That was a prophetic shadow, teaching us that blood marks territory. Wherever blood is seen, witches cannot cross, demons cannot dwell, death cannot reign. And witches know this. That's why they work in secrecy. That's why they thrive in silence. They don't want you to ever wake up to the reality that blood is your covering. They fear when people speak with authority about blood because it strips them of their influence. Witches use fear as their greatest weapon, but blood casts out fear because it is evidence of divine ownership. Let me explain something deeper. In the spiritual realm, words matter, but blood seals. You can speak promises, you can declare intentions, but until blood is shed, nothing is binding. That's why in ancient times, covenants always required blood. And that's also why witches try to use blood in their rituals. They understand that words alone are weak unless sealed. But here's the mystery. They can never access the eternal blood that was shed once and for all. They can imitate, but they cannot replicate. They can copy, but they cannot carry the same authority. And this is why they tremble. The reason witches fear blood is because it sets boundaries. Think of it this way. In the natural, if you see a boundary line, you know not to cross it because it belongs to someone else. In the spirit, blood is that boundary line. When witches see blood, they know this life, this family, this property belongs to another authority. They know they cannot invade what has already been sealed. Have you noticed that in every war the price of freedom is blood? Nations are built on the blood of those who fought for them. Even governments know that the highest cost is blood. Why? Because blood is the most valuable currency on earth. You can replace gold, silver, money, and possessions, but you cannot replace blood. Once shed, it is eternal. Witches know this truth very well, and it is why they tremble when confronted with it. Now hear me carefully. There are 3 reasons witches fear blood. The first is because blood exposes them. Witches operate in darkness, but blood speaks in light. When blood is applied in prayer, in declaration, it pulls their works out of hiding. It is like shining a spotlight in a dark room. Their manipulation cannot stand. Their curses lose effect. Their monitoring spirits are blinded. The second reason is because blood speaks louder than their incantations. Have you ever noticed that witches rely on chanting, repeating words, and casting spells? They depend on sound to shape the atmosphere, but what they cannot stand is when blood begins to speak. The Bible says the blood of Abel cried out from the ground. That means blood has a voice. And if the blood of a man could cry for justice, how much more does blood that carries eternal covenant speak over your life? Witches fear it because no matter how many words they chant, blood silences their voices. The third reason is because blood enforces legal rights. Witches always look for legal entry into people's lives. They exploit ignorance. They exploit sin. They exploit open doors. They go to court in the spiritual realm and accuse. But when blood is present, it overrules every accusation. It declares that the price has already been paid. It shuts their case permanently. That is why they fear it, because no matter what evidence they present, blood declares case dismissed. Think about this. Why do you think witches use blood sacrifices in their dark works? Why do you think they shed animal blood at their altars? Because they understand the principle. Without blood, nothing has authority. But even in their rituals, they tremble. They tremble because they know the blood they use is limited, temporary, corruptible. They know there exists a blood they cannot match. They fear that you will discover it, that you will apply it, that you will stand under it. And then you will have to stand down to where you are not, to where you will step under it. Let me give you an illustration. Imagine a courtroom. On one side, witches are accusing you, presenting curses, generational sins, failures, and weaknesses. On the other side, there is no lawyer speaking for you. But suddenly, blood appears in the courtroom. It doesn't argue, it doesn't debate, it doesn't shout. It simply stands as evidence. And the judge looks at the blood and says, "Case closed." That is what witches fear most. They fear the evidence of blood. Witches are afraid not of your physical strength, not of your degrees, not of your wealth. They are afraid of what is covering you. When they see blood, they see ownership. They know they cannot trespass. They know they cannot succeed. They know they are already defeated. Let's go deeper. In the ancient world, priests would sprinkle blood on the altar, on the people, and on the sacred objects. Why? To purify, to sanctify, and to consecrate. Wherever blood was sprinkled, that thing became untouchable. It was no longer common, it was holy, set apart. Witches fear blood because it makes you untouchable. It marks you as holy, separated, belonging to a higher power. That's why witches attack people who don't know their value. They attack people who treat life casually. They attack people who ignore the power of blood. But the moment you recognize it, the moment you walk in the consciousness of it, they withdraw. They fear exposure. They fear confrontation. They fear when someone stands with authority and declares blood over their life. Have you ever wondered why in horror movies witches are portrayed as hating the sight of blood in certain contexts? It's because even in fiction, the world cannot deny the reality. Blood interrupts their power. Blood disarms their curses. Blood burns their spells like fire. They cannot resist it. Listen carefully. Witches are not afraid of religion. They are not afraid of church buildings. They are not afraid of ceremonies. They are afraid of revelation, because revelation gives you authority. And the greatest revelation they never want you to have is the power of blood. They know once you understand it, their chains break, their curses collapse, their assignments are cancelled. That is why they work overtime, to keep you distracted, to make you ignorant, to fill your life with fear instead of faith. They whisper lies, they plant doubts, they magnify problems. But they can never overcome blood. Blood is the eternal reminder of their defeat. Every time they see it, they remember they have already lost. Blood carries memory. It records everything. That is why when Cain killed Abel, God said, "Your brother's blood cries to me from the ground." Blood keeps record. Witches fear it because it testifies against them. Every injustice, every hidden evil, blood exposes it. They cannot escape its witness. And let me tell you, witches can try to infiltrate your dreams, they can try to manipulate your emotions, they can try to plant fear in your house, but once you declare blood over your home, it becomes a fortress. No spell can cross that threshold. No curse can rest on that foundation. No monitoring spirit can linger in that atmosphere. They know it. Blood is the one thing they cannot counterfeit. They can imitate rituals, they can mimic prayers, they can even disguise themselves as angels of light. but they cannot reproduce the eternal power of blood. That's why they avoid it. That's why they tremble when it is declared. That's why they scatter when it is applied. Now here's the secret witches do not want you to know. The blood that marks you also empowers you. It does not just protect, it empowers. It gives you boldness, it gives you confidence, it gives you authority. Which is fear when you rise up boldly, not intimidated, not shaken, not silenced. They fear when you walk in power, knowing that you are covered by something greater than their rituals. That is why you must never live unaware. You must never live casually. You must never live thinking life is ordinary. Life is spiritual. And the greatest secret to victory in the spirit is blood. Witches fear it because it cannot be undone. Once it is applied, it is eternal. Once it is declared, it is permanent. Once it is sealed, it is irreversible. Blood is more than a symbol, it is substance. It carries voice, it carries covenant, it carries ownership. That's why witches don't just dislike it, they fear it, they dread it, because they know it is the one thing that cannot be overturned. And the greatest tragedy in the world today is not that witches exist. It's that believers do not know what they carry. When you live unaware of the power of blood, you walk as prey. But when you live with revelation, you walk as predator. Witches thrive in ignorance, but revelation strips them naked. The blood is revelation in action. When you understand it, you stop running from witches, that witches start running from you. Look at the Passover again. Death was moving from house to house. Every door was a potential grave. Every household was a potential tragedy. But God gave a secret. Apply blood on your doorposts. Notice he didn't say shout at death. He didn't say negotiate with death. He didn't say fight with death. He said apply blood. And when death saw blood, it passed over. That tells us something critical. Blood is not a suggestion, it is a shield. It is not just theology, it is territorial marking. It is not only protection, it is proclamation. Witches understand that they cannot trespass marked ground. That's why they fear it. They will try to curse you, but the curse bounces back. They will try to monitor you, but their vision is blinded. They will try to send sickness, but it evaporates. They will try to whisper fear, but it dissolves. Why? Because blood is on you. They see it in the spirit and they know they cannot touch you. They say to you, and here is the mystery, witches use blood to bind people. They use it to enter into covenants of darkness. Some even mix their own blood with others to tie destinies together in bondage. That's how powerful they know blood is. But what they fear is that you might realize there is a greater blood that breaks every one of their covenants. You see, the devil has no original material. He only copies. Every dark ritual is a cheap imitation of divine reality. And what is the reality? Blood speaks. Blood protects. Blood delivers. When Abel was killed, his blood cried out. It cried out for vengeance. That means blood never goes silent. If human blood can cry out for justice, then witches know that the greater blood cries louder. It cries out not for vengeance, but for mercy, for deliverance, for protection. And that voice they cannot silence. Why do you think witches hate prayer that invokes blood? Because they know it is not ordinary prayer. It is not just noise in the air. It is covenant enforcement. It is territorial declaration. It is courtroom evidence. They hate it because when you speak that way, they lose their hold instantly. Let's look at something deeper. In the book of Exodus, after the blood was applied to the doorposts, the people inside were commanded to eat the lamb. Why? Because blood was for protection, but the lamb was for empowerment. This means that blood doesn't only stop witches from coming in, it also strengthens you to walk out. It doesn't just keep the enemy away, it equips you to confront the enemy. Witches fear blood because it is not passive, it is active. It doesn't just stop them, it empowers you. In every generation, people have understood that blood equals life. That's why warriors in pagan nations would drink the blood of their enemies. They believed it gave them power. That's why even witch doctors shed blood at their shrines. They know without it their rituals have no life. But what terrifies them is that there is blood available that is incorruptible, blood that never decays, blood that never loses potency, blood that never expires. They fear it because it doesn't just compete with their sacrifices, it cancels them permanently. Let me illustrate. Imagine a witch performing a ritual in the middle of the night. They take a chicken or a goat, they spill its blood, and they begin to chant. In that moment, they are trying to create a covenant, trying to open a door, trying to bind someone's destiny. But the moment a man or woman stands and declares a superior blood, that ritual becomes powerless. That altar becomes useless. That sacrifice becomes meaningless. Witches know this. That's why they fear it. Now, there are 3 dimensions of blood you must understand. First, blood protects. It covers, it shields, it marks. Just as the blood on the doorpost kept death away, so blood marks your life as untouchable. Witches see it and retreat. Second, blood purifies. It cleanses what witches try to defile. One of the main strategies of witchcraft is defilement, polluting dreams, polluting emotions, polluting environments. But blood washes it clean. It restores purity where witchcraft brought corruption. Third, blood empowers. It strengthens you to resist, to fight, to overcome. Witches fear empowered people. They fear when you are bold, when you are fearless, when you confront them with authority. Blood makes you bold. It reminds you that you are not ordinary, that you are under a covenant greater than any spell. Witches fear blood because it takes away their greatest weapon, fear. You see, witchcraft thrives on fear. It is psychological warfare. They plant the idea in your mind that they are powerful, that they can control you, that they can destroy you. But the moment you realize you are under blood, fear evaporates. And when fear leaves, their power breaks. They lose their grip completely. Blood is spiritual currency. It is the highest payment possible. That's why wars are won with blood, not with gold. That's why altars demand blood, not just incense. That's why covenants require blood, not just promises. Witches know this truth. But what terrifies them is that there is a blood that has already paid the ultimate price. A blood that cannot be challenged in any court. A blood that shuts their mouth. Let me tell you something. Witches may attempt to intimidate you, but they know who is covered. They know who is marked. When they see blood on someone, they know they cannot win. They may try to send distractions, but they cannot penetrate. They may try to curse, but it backfires. They may try to bind, but the chains snap. Blood terrifies them because it is the one authority they cannot manipulate. When Moses consecrated the people, he sprinkled blood on them. It was a symbol that they were set apart, marked, belonging to God. And when you are marked, witches know it. You don't even need to announce it. In the spirit, it glows like a fire. That's why some witches, when they try to attack certain people, fall sick themselves. That's why some curses, when sent out, rebound and destroy the sender. They touched blood-marked territory. They trespassed boundaries sealed in blood. Blood carries identity. In science, we know that DNA is carried in the blood. It tells who you belong to, what family you come from, what lineage you carry. In the spirit, blood carries divine DNA. It announces your identity in the unseen realm. When witches see it, they recognize it immediately. They know you are not alone. They know you are backed by something greater. That is why they fear it. Every witch knows that altars without blood are powerless. That is why they always shed some form of blood in their rituals. But here is their nightmare. They know their blood sacrifices are temporary, but the greater blood is eternal. Once applied, it doesn't need repetition. Once spoken, it doesn't fade. Once released, it stands forever. They cannot compete with that. And here is something else. Blood enforces inheritance. In families, inheritance passes through bloodline. That's why surnames, identities, and legacies follow blood. Witches fear blood because it enforces spiritual inheritance too. It ensures that no matter what curse they try to send, it cannot override the blessing sealed by blood. They know they cannot cut you off from your destiny once it is sealed. When you walk in this understanding, your posture changes. You stop being timid. You stop being intimidated. You stop living in fear of witches. Instead, you live in authority. And that authority is what they fear most. Remember, witches cannot conquer blood. They cannot counterfeit it. They cannot silence it. They cannot override it. The blood is their greatest nightmare. It exposes them, silences them, and overrules them. It is eternal evidence that they have already lost. Blood is the greatest language in the spiritual realm. It is not English, not Hebrew, not Greek. It is universal. Every spirit understands it. Angels understand it. Demons understand it. Witches understand it. The entire creation recognizes the sound of blood. That is why they fear it. Because when blood speaks, it overrides every other voice. And what witches dread most is that you might realize that blood speaks on your behalf. It testifies, it argues for you, it pleads for you, it defends you. You may not know how to pray long prayers. You may not know how to chant scriptures for hours. But when you invoke blood, heaven hears, hell trembles, witches scatter. That's how powerful it is. Let me take you back to the Old Testament. Every year the high priest would enter the Holy of Holies with blood. He did not enter empty-handed. If he went without blood, he died instantly. That means blood was the access code to the presence of God. Witches know this principle. They also know they cannot access that presence. They can imitate rituals, but they cannot open the veil. Blood gives access where incantations fail. In the wilderness, when Israel sinned, Moses sprinkled blood to purify the camp. Every time the people defiled themselves, blood restored them. Witches fear blood because it has the power to undo their works. They may try to defile you with dreams, contaminate you with fear, or pollute your atmosphere with curses, but the moment blood is invoked, everything is cleansed. It is a reset button in the spirit. Why do you think witches love secrecy? Because exposure kills their influence. Blood exposes them instantly. It shines light in darkness. They want you ignorant, silent, passive. But the moment you rise up in revelation, they panic. They fear not your noise, but your knowledge. They fear when you know what blood can do. Now think about this. Why did Pharaoh's magicians imitate Moses when he performed miracles? Because witches always imitate. They copy divine patterns. But notice, when Moses threw his staff and it became a serpent, the magicians did the same. Yet Moses' serpent swallowed theirs. That's exactly how blood works. They may use animal sacrifices, but the greater blood swallows their sacrifices. They may try to bind, but the greater blood breaks their chains. They may try to mimic, but the greater blood exposes their fraud. Witches are afraid of authority. Authority terrifies them because they operate through manipulation, not through true power. And blood is the ultimate expression of authority. It declares that ownership has already been settled. That's why when you apply it, you no longer argue with witches, you enforce. You no longer debate, you dominate. They know this, and that's why they tremble. Let me bring this to a practical level. Have you ever heard of people who cannot sleep at night, constantly attacked by nightmares, pressed down in their sleep, or chased by strange figures? That is witchcraft harassment. They are monitoring spirits, feeding on fear. But the moment you rise in your room and declare blood over your bed, over your house, over your dreams, the harassment ends. Witches fear blood-marked territory. They know they cannot cross the line. I once heard a story of a young woman who was tormented constantly by a witch in her neighborhood. Every night she would wake up exhausted, drained, and fearful. She went for medical checkups, but nothing was wrong. One day a minister taught her about declaring blood over her life before sleep. That night she stood boldly, laid her hands on her own head and declared, "I am covered by blood." She went to bed, and for the first time she slept peacefully. It's the next morning, the witch who had been tormenting her came to her door, begging for food. Why? Because the attack backfired. The arrows bounced back. Witches fear blood because it reverses their curses. You see, witches know something many believers do not. Blood is a weapon. They understand it as a tool of power, and that's why they try to misuse it. But the weapon in your hand is far greater. And what terrifies them is that once you start wielding it, they lose control. They can no longer touch you, no longer manipulate you, no longer oppress you. Another thing, blood brings deliverance. When Israel left Egypt, it was not just the plagues that set them free. It was the blood on their doors. That night marked the turning point. That night broke the chains. Witches fear blood because it is deliverance in action. It breaks invisible chains. It uproots ancient curses. It closes demonic gates. Notice also that blood speaks generationally. The curse of Adam affected all humanity because it was in the bloodline. But the power of greater blood affects generations too. It overrides every ancestral curse, every generational covenant with darkness, every inherited bondage. Witches fear it because it interrupts their generational claims. They may say, "This family belongs to us," but blood says, "Not anymore." And let me tell you, witches are legalists. They work by rules. They need permission to operate. They need open doors to attack. They need legal grounds to invade. That's why they demand sacrifices, why they create covenants, why they tie people through fear. But blood overrules their legal grounds. It erases the evidence. It wipes the contract. It silences the accuser. They fear it because it destroys their legal case instantly. Let's consider dreams again. Many people see themselves eating in dreams, having sexual encounters, or being pursued by animals. These are signs of witchcraft manipulation. They are covenants being formed in the subconscious. But when you declare blood before sleeping, your dreams are sanctified. Instead of manipulation, you begin to receive revelation. Witches fear when you control your dream life with blood. because dreams are the gateways they love to exploit. There is another reason witches fear blood. It is final. It cannot be undone. When a sacrifice is made with blood, it is irreversible. That's why even in pagan cultures, when people cut themselves to make blood covenants, they knew it was eternal. Witches know this, and they fear the finality of the greater blood, because it declares it is finished. There is nothing they can add, nothing they can erase, nothing they can overturn. Blood has always been central to worship. From Genesis to Revelation, altars were useless without it. Abel's offering was accepted because it involved blood. Cain's was rejected because it did not. That teaches us something. Blood is the only acceptable offering in the Spirit. Witches know this. They know they can dance, chant, burn incense, and call spirits, but unless blood is shed, their altars remain weak. But when the greater blood enters the equation, every dark altar collapses. And here's something you must not miss. Witches fear not just the presence of blood, but the consciousness of blood. You see, many people have access to protection, but they don't walk in awareness. They are covered, but they don't know it. Witches thrive on ignorance, but the moment you start living with the consciousness that blood is your seal, everything changes. You start walking boldly, praying boldly. That boldness is what witches fear most. Think of it this way. Blood is like a signature on a legal document. Without it, the paper is just words. With it, the document is binding. In the Spirit, witches may bring papers filled with accusations against you, but blood is the signature that invalidates their claims. They can shout, they can scream, they can accuse, but blood is the final stamp. That's why they fear it. Blood is also fire. In the Spirit it burns. It is untouchable. That's why witches avoid certain people. They see flames around them. They see fire in their atmosphere. And they know the source is blood. They cannot touch it, cannot manipulate it, cannot resist it. Blood is a witness. It testifies in the unseen courtroom of heaven and hell. That is why witches dread it. When they attempt to accuse you, blood rises up and says, "Not guilty." When they attempt to curse you, blood answers, "Already redeemed." When they try to enslave you, blood proclaims, "Already purchased." Witches cannot argue with blood because it is irrefutable evidence. Have you noticed that witches spend time studying their targets? They observe, they monitor, they search for weaknesses. They look for open doors, hidden sins, emotional wounds. They want to find a crack in the wall through which they can enter. But when they find blood covering you, their assignment collapses. They can study all they want, but they see the seal that says, "Property of the Almighty." That is why they fear it. Blood is also a weapon of remembrance. It reminds the spiritual realm of what has already been done. Every time witches attempt to rise, blood reminds them they are already defeated. Every time they whisper threats, blood reminds them of their powerlessness. Every time they try to launch new attacks, blood reminds them the price has already been paid. They hate it because it keeps reminding them that their time is short, their dominion is broken, and their plans are doomed. Let us go back to the principle of life being in the blood. Science confirms that blood carries oxygen, nutrients, immunity, and DNA. Spiritually, it carries identity, covenant, and ownership. That means witches cannot touch your bloodline once it is sealed. They love to target bloodlines, families plagued with repeated patterns of sickness, poverty, addiction, premature death. But when you enforce blood over your lineage, the pattern breaks, the chain ends. They fear this interruption because it destroys their generational strategies. That is why some families live under cycles for decades, because no one rises up to enforce blood. Witches thrive in cycles. They feed on repetition. But the moment one man or woman declares, "This bloodline is sealed," the cycle is broken. Witches flee because they cannot continue their generational harvest. Blood also consecrates. When something is consecrated, it is set apart for divine use. That's why in the Old Testament, even the utensils of the temple had to be sprinkled with blood. Not just the people, but the cups, the bowls, the altar, the garments. Why? Because blood makes the ordinary holy. And when something is holy, witches cannot touch it. They may try, but it burns them. They may approach, but it repels them. They know this, which is why they steer clear of blood-marked lives. In the book of Job, we see a man who continually offered sacrifices for his children. He understood the principle of covering. The devil admitted, "You have placed a hedge around him." What was that hedge? It was blood. Witches know that where blood is consistently enforced, there is a hedge of fire. They cannot penetrate it. They cannot dismantle it. Have you also noticed that witches love blood in their own twisted way? They crave it because they know it releases power. But here's the irony. They fear it more than they crave it. They use animal sacrifices, even human blood in extreme cases, because they understand the principle. But they are terrified of the greater blood. They cannot stand before it. It is their torment. It is their undoing. Blood is the language of victory. Every great victory in history has been sealed with blood. Nations gained independence at the cost of blood. Families were preserved by sacrifices of blood. And spiritually, every deliverance has blood at its center. Witches know they cannot claim victory over anyone who is marked with it. That's why they fear it. Look at Gideon. Before he could defeat the Midianites, he had to build an altar. And what was required on the altar? Blood. Once blood was shed, victory was guaranteed. The enemy fell. Witches understand this pattern. They build their own altars with blood. But they tremble when confronted with a superior altar that cannot be overturned. Let me explain something very practical. Many people wonder, why do witches keep attacking me even though I pray? The reason is not prayer alone. The reason is what you enforce in prayer. Prayer without blood is like going to court without evidence. You may have passion, you may shout, but the judge needs proof. Blood is the proof. When witches accuse, blood stands as your evidence. That is why they fear it. Do you remember in the book of Kings, when the king of Moab was losing a battle? He sacrificed his own son on the wall. The battle turned in his favor temporarily because blood speaks. Even pagans know it. If the blood of a mortal son could sway a battle, how much more will greater blood silence every witchcraft war? Witches know they cannot compete with that. Witches also know that blood enforces promises. God made a covenant with Abraham and sealed it with blood. From that moment, the promises were irreversible. That is why witches cannot nullify promises sealed by blood. They fear it because it makes blessings untouchable. Now think with me. Why do witches hate gatherings where blood is invoked in worship? Because it is not just a ritual, it is a legal proclamation. Every time blood is invoked, it declares in the heavens, paid in full, sealed forever. Witches know their contracts are cancelled in that moment. They know their altars collapse. That is why they fear such gatherings. Blood also brings separation. When the Israelites put blood on their doors, they were separated from Egypt. Egypt faced judgment, Israel walked free. That separation is what witches fear. They cannot mingle with blood-marked lives. They cannot share space with blood-sealed territory. They cannot operate where separation has been declared. Blood is light. In the unseen realm, it shines. Witches work in darkness, hiding in shadows, using secrecy to operate. But when blood is present, their darkness is exposed. Their covering is removed. Their secrets are revealed. That is why they hate it. That is why they scatter when it is proclaimed. And let me remind you, witches are not omnipotent. They are not all-powerful. Their power is limited, borrowed, dependent on deception. But blood is eternal, limitless, undefeatable. It does not fade, it does not weaken, it does not lose potency. They know this, and it terrifies them. Blood carries both justice and mercy. To the guilty it speaks mercy, to the oppressor it speaks justice. Witches cannot manipulate this balance. They cannot override it. They are trapped by it. That is why they fear it. Because every time blood speaks, they lose ground. And so, when witches gather in their covens, they know the one thing they cannot withstand. They may chant, they may curse, they may plot. But when someone declares blood, the meeting scatters. The fire burns through their circle, the atmosphere shifts. They run because blood is the end of their influence. Blood is the only substance on earth that carries both the physical and the spiritual simultaneously. It is the divine code written into humanity. Science can analyze it under a microscope, measure its cells and chart its DNA, but science cannot explain why blood carries covenant. Science cannot explain why blood has always been at the center of sacrifice, redemption, and consecration. The spiritual realm knows what the natural realm often ignores, that blood is the bridge between the seen and the unseen. This is why witches build altars. This is why they demand sacrifice. They understand that blood attracts spirits. Blood is a magnet in the spiritual world. When blood is spilled, something is summoned, something is released, something is claimed. But the fear that grips witches is not blood in general. It is the blood that carries covenant with the living God. They cannot stand before that blood because it does not invite demons, it repels them. It does not call for darkness, it releases light. It does not enslave, it liberates. Look throughout history. In Egypt, the magicians of Pharaoh could mimic the miracles of Moses to a degree. They turned staffs into serpents. They copied some of the signs, but there was one act they could not counterfeit: blood applied to the doorposts. When the destroyer passed through Egypt, the magicians had no answer for that. Their spells failed. Their incantations were useless because the blood became a shield that no spirit of death could penetrate. That story was not just about Israel's deliverance, it was about a spiritual principle. Witches can compete with power, but they cannot compete with covenant. Witches understand something many believers forget. The blood you honor determines the spirit you attract. That is why they fear you discovering the secret. Because if you walk ignorant, you can be manipulated. But if you walk conscious, you become untouchable. Blood has a voice, and the voice of covenant blood always speaks louder than the voice of witchcraft. The book of Hebrews says the blood speaks better things than the blood of Abel. Abel's blood cried for vengeance, but covenant blood cries for mercy, protection, and redemption. Witches dread this because once that voice begins to speak, their whispers are silenced. You cannot hex a man covered by a voice louder than your curse. You cannot summon misfortune into the life of a woman covered by blood that decrees blessings. You cannot infiltrate a home where every doorpost has been marked by covenant, because blood builds a barrier witches cannot cross. They traffic in fear, but blood dissolves fear. They traffic in secrecy, but blood exposes hidden things. They traffic in spiritual contracts, but blood cancels contracts. That is why many people who experience witchcraft attacks report sudden breakthroughs when they begin to declare blood over their lives. Because witches are not afraid of your personality, your education, or even your prayers when they lack revelation. What shakes them is when you combine prayer with blood consciousness. That combination ignites authority. That combination terrifies the kingdom of darkness. Remember this, witches understand spiritual law. They don't fear you because you go to church. They fear you when you enforce law. And one of the highest spiritual laws is that blood seals covenant. If you understand that, then no witch can tamper with your destiny. The problem is not the strength of their spell, it is the ignorance of the believer. Because a believer who knows the voice of blood will never be a victim of witchcraft. Look again at the pattern of Scripture. Noah built an altar after the flood, and what did he place on it? Blood sacrifice. And the Bible says God smelled a pleasing aroma and made a covenant never to destroy the earth by flood again. That covenant was sealed with blood. Abraham also built altars, and blood was always at the center. Isaac, Jacob, Moses, all of them knew that no altar was valid without blood. Witches also know this principle. That is why they sacrifice. That is why they use blood in their rituals. But they tremble when confronted with the reality that the blood they use is temporary, fragile, and corruptible, while the blood you carry covenant with is eternal, unbreakable, and incorruptible. When David faced Goliath, he did not just come as a shepherd boy. He came under covenant. He declared, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" Uncircumcised meant outside of covenant. In other words, David was saying, this giant may be tall, this giant may be armed, but he has no blood covenant backing him. I, on the other hand, may be young and small, but I am covered by covenant blood. And covenant blood always trumps strength. That's why witches fear blood. Because blood places you under covenant, and covenant gives you legal right to victory. Even in the New Testament, the same pattern continues. Jesus could have redeemed humanity with words alone, but he did not. He went to the cross and shed blood. Why? Because without blood there is no covenant. Words declare, but blood seals. Words promise, but blood delivers. Witches know this. That is why they try to enslave people with oaths sealed by blood. But once covenant blood has been shed, no lesser oath can bind you. That is the terror of witches. They know their contracts collapse in the presence of superior blood. And here is the secret they don't want you to know. When you live with this awareness, their intimidation tactics lose all power. They want you to fear them. They want you to believe they can curse you, torment you, and limit you. But when you declare blood over your life, you remind them of the one thing they cannot override. You remind them of their defeat. You remind them that their power is temporary, but covenant blood is eternal. The spiritual world is governed by laws. Spirits don't just operate randomly. They need legal ground. Witches gain access through open doors, sin, fear, ignorance, bitterness. But once blood covers those doors, access is denied. It doesn't matter what ritual they perform, what curse they chant, what object they bury. If blood covers you, their assignment is cancelled. This is why they fear it. Not because it is a symbol, but because it is a law. Witches often attack in the night because darkness gives them an advantage over the ignorant. But when you rise in the night and declare blood, the tables turn. Suddenly, the very darkness they use becomes the stage for their defeat. They fear believers who know how to pray with blood consciousness, because those prayers are not just words. They are legal decrees backed by covenant. And every time you make such a decree, The spiritual realm must respond. That is why witches flee homes where people pray with this revelation. They may try to torment you, but once they sense blood awareness, they back off. Because they know the cost of touching covenant blood. They know the judgment that follows such rebellion. They know the fire that surrounds such covering. The reason blood terrifies them is that it reminds them of their own defeat. The blood is proof that their kingdom has already lost. They may whisper, they may intimidate, they may deceive, but blood is evidence. Evidence that victory has already been won. Evidence that their curses have already been broken. Evidence that no witchcraft weapon formed against you can prosper. And so the only power they have left is deception, to keep you ignorant, to keep you thinking that blood is just natural, to keep you from declaring it, applying it, and walking in it. Because once you do, their reign of fear is over. They know this. That is why they fear blood. That is why they hide the secret. Because once you know it, they lose control forever. Blood carries memory. Scientists may explain it in medical terms, but in the spirit, blood testifies. It does not forget. It speaks across generations, across timelines, across destinies. When Cain killed Abel, God himself declared, "The blood of your brother cries out to me from the ground." That was not symbolic, it was literal. The blood of Abel was speaking. And what was it speaking? It was demanding justice. That is why witches fear blood. They know that once blood has been spilled, it carries a voice they cannot silence. They may cast spells over bones. They may bury charms in soil. They may chant incantations in the night. But when blood cries out, their whispers are drowned in its thunder. That is why in their rituals they seek blood. They cut themselves, they slaughter animals, they even pursue the innocent. They are attempting to tap into a principle they did not create but can only imitate. But here is the mystery. When they spill blood, it condemns them. When they shed it in rebellion, it testifies against them. This is why the kingdom of darkness operates in shadows, never in light. Because blood exposes, blood reveals, blood remembers. Think about it. Whenever a covenant is made in Scripture, it was sealed with blood. Noah built an altar after the flood and blood was shed. Abraham was given promises, but the covenant was sealed with the shedding of blood. Israel was delivered from Egypt, but the blood of lambs painted on doorposts was the mark that death could not enter. Every step in the redemptive journey of God's people was tied to blood. Do you realize what that means? It means that in every era, every generation, the power of blood has stood as a barrier against the schemes of darkness. That is why witches despise it. Because no matter how they try to operate, they are forced to recognize that blood has already spoken. Blood is currency in the spiritual world. If money moves economies on earth, then blood moves economies in the unseen realm. Witches know this. That is why they demand sacrifices from those they initiate. They require life exchange. They require something more than words. Because in their dark understanding, blood is the payment that opens doors. But when they see blood that has already been paid in full, they fear it because it bankrupts them. It renders their demands useless. They cannot demand payment from someone whose account is already settled. They tremble because blood carries light. In the unseen realm, blood is not just red. It glows with radiance, with covenantal power, with divine signatures. Witches operate in darkness, so when true blood is invoked, it blinds them. They lose their grip, their spells scatter, their chants echo back against them. They are like bats caught in the sudden blaze of daylight. This is why they hate blood. This is why they hope you remain ignorant of it. And here lies the greatest danger for many people. Ignorance. Many walk around covered in blood without knowing it. Many live under covenant without understanding it. And ignorance is the enemy's greatest advantage. If you don't know what you carry, you will never use it. If you don't know the shield around your life, you will cower at shadows. Witches fear blood, but they don't fear uninformed believers. They fear revelation. They fear a man or woman who knows how to declare, how to apply, how to invoke, how to stand boldly in the covenant. That is when their power collapses. That is when their weapons backfire. That is when their assignments turn into confusion. Blood is a seal. It marks property. It announces ownership. When the blood is present, witches cannot cross the line. They may attempt to hover, to intimidate, to send dreams or disturbances, but the blood raises a standard. It declares, this belongs to another. This life is already spoken for. This destiny is sealed. And when they hear that declaration, they back away. Not because they want to, but because they must. They are bound by spiritual law, and blood is the highest law in the realm of spirits. It is fascinating that in nearly every culture, blood taboos exist. From Africa to Asia to the Middle East, from ancient tribes to modern religions, blood is always revered, always feared, always handled carefully. Why? Because even the natural world understands what the spiritual world has long known. Blood is sacred. That is why witches operate in secrecy. They know that if the masses ever awaken to the truth about blood, their grip will break overnight. Their manipulations would collapse instantly. Their altars would lose value. The reason blood terrifies witches is because it is eternal. Spells expire, curses can fade, charms lose potency, but blood never loses its voice. The blood that was spilled thousands of years ago still speaks today with the same authority it carried the moment it was shed. That is terrifying to witches because it means time is not on their side. They may chant, they may plot, they may send arrows of affliction, but blood already occupies the future. Blood already fills the atmosphere. Blood already guards the timeline. They cannot outlast it. Blood also carries inheritance. In the natural, your DNA is in your blood. It reveals your lineage, your ancestry, your family tree. But in the spiritual, blood also carries destiny. It ties you to promises, to covenants, to prophetic words spoken long before you were born. That is why witches try to corrupt bloodlines. They target families, not just individuals. They want to pollute the stream. But the moment the true blood touches a family line, purification begins. Generational curses snap. Hidden chains break. Old altars collapse. This terrifies witches because it means once blood enters the equation, their centuries of investment in a family can be undone in a moment. That is why some of you have been attacked more fiercely than others. It is not about you. It is about your bloodline. The enemy fears what will happen when the true blood touches your household. He fears the generational reversal. He fears the restoration that will come. He fears that once one person in the line understands the power of blood, the entire family will be set free. Witches operate with foresight. They see destinies before they unfold. That is why they launch early attacks. But what they don't want you to know is that blood is stronger than foresight. It is stronger than prophecy. It is stronger than curses. It rewrites the story. It reclaims the family. It restores the foundation. The blood is also a weapon in warfare. In ancient battles, warriors would dip their weapons in blood before charging. Why? Because they believed blood gave strength. Blood gave assurance. Blood was the difference between victory and defeat. And even today, in the spirit realm, blood is the ultimate weapon. When witches see blood declared, they see a sword they cannot withstand. They see an army they cannot match. They see a shield they cannot penetrate. That is why they fear it more than anything else. And so we stand at the very core of spiritual reality, which is, do not fear your education, your possessions, or even your strength. They fear the blood. They fear it because it is the one thing they cannot buy, they cannot control, and they cannot manipulate. Blood is the eternal witness in the unseen realm, testifying that you belong to a covenant greater than their incantations. Every time you walk in awareness of it, every time you declare it over your life, you remind the kingdom of darkness that you are untouchable. Do not live as if you are uncovered. Do not fight battles in your own strength. Do not fear their whispers in the night. The blood speaks for you. It speaks of protection. It speaks of ownership. It speaks of victory. Witches scatter not because of your volume, but because of your covenant. They flee not because of your name, but because of the blood that covers your name. So lift your head high, walk with boldness, and silence every threat of darkness, for the blood has already made its declaration. You are marked, you are sealed, you are protected, and you are victorious. That is the secret they don't want you to know, but it is the truth that will keep you free forever.